The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. Deep in the heart of Colorado lies ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in America. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it houses the nation's most dangerous criminals, men who once ruled violent gang empires. Here, 18 notorious gang leaders serve life sentences in near-total isolation. Cut off from the world, stripped of freedom, and confined to concrete cells for 23 hours a day, these men face a life defined by silence, tension, and psychological torment. This is a journey inside ADX Florence, a chilling look at power, punishment, and survival at the edge of human endurance. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. When a notorious gang leader is sentenced to life without parole and sent to ADX Florence, their life outside is over. The transfer process itself is a calculated psychological and logistical operation. Men who once commanded fear across neighborhoods, controlling drug trades and violent operations, now become faceless numbers in a federal system designed to strip identity, control movement, and break the will. The journey to ADX is carefully orchestrated, transported under heavy guard, often in restraints and with constant surveillance. Inmates are moved from state prisons to the heart of Colorado's high-security compound. Even the ride is designed to unsettle. Blackout curtains, controlled communication, and unpredictable timing prevent inmates from feeling any sense of normality or control. Gang leaders who once ruled with authority are reminded from the first moment that power belongs only to the prison system now. Upon arrival, the first stop is the intake center. Every inmate undergoes a rigorous assessment, physical examination, psychological profiling, and an inventory of their criminal history. Tattoos, the intricate symbols of gang affiliation, loyalty, and personal identity, are documented in detail. Some tattoos commemorate crimes, rivalries, or affiliations with notorious organizations. For these gang leaders, this step is particularly humiliating. The symbols of their past power are cataloged as evidence and reminders that their reputation means nothing within ADX walls. The intake process includes complete disrobing and property confiscation. Personal items, anything that could be weaponized, or anything holding sentimental value, letters, photographs, jewelry, are taken away. Inmates are issued a standard uniform, gray shirt and pants, simple shoes. Identity is reduced to a number. For men who once lived in a world of fear, respect, and influence, this depersonalization is both a shock and a calculated first step in control. Following the intake, inmates are escorted to a temporary holding cell where they spend their first night under strict observation. Here, the psychological impact begins to settle in. ADX Florence is designed to isolate. Cells are minimalistic, soundproofed, and devoid of natural light. Gang leaders, used to controlling people around them, now face the terrifying realization that even intimidation holds no weight. Prison staff rarely speak beyond necessary instructions, and every action is monitored through cameras. This is not just imprisonment. It is psychological warfare. Orientation at ADX Florence introduces inmates to the rules of survival. Unlike state prisons, where gangs operate under their own informal hierarchies, ADX enforces strict separation. Inmates are assigned cells with no contact with others, and communal areas are minimal and highly regulated. Staff explains the schedule: 1 hour of exercise, 3 meals delivered in the cell, strict lights on and lights off protocols. Any deviation, no matter how small, is met with immediate discipline. Medical and psychological evaluations are ongoing. Many gang leaders exhibit signs of stress, anxiety, or post-traumatic responses during their first weeks. Flashbacks to past crimes, fear of losing status, and the isolation from all human contact intensify the mental strain. For some, this initial period can trigger breakdowns, panic attacks, or resignation. Others, hardened by years in violent environments, adopt calculated compliance as a survival tactic. Gang leaders often try to maintain some control even in confinement. Tattoos become a form of personal identity. Some secretly show them to guards to assert toughness or negotiate minor concessions. But ADX protocols are unyielding. Guards are trained to recognize threats and signs of manipulation, and any attempt to assert dominance is met with swift countermeasures. Power here is redefined. Compliance, patience, and mental fortitude replace weapons, reputation, and intimidation. The final step of processing is assignment to a permanent cell, often in the special housing unit. This decision is based on the inmate's criminal history, gang affiliation, and behavioral assessment. Cells are 7 by 12 feet, concrete with a steel door, a sink, and a toilet. There is a small window that allows light, but no meaningful view. For men accustomed to orchestrating criminal empires, the transition is brutal. Every day in this cell reinforces the reality. Outside influence is gone, identity is stripped, and survival depends on internal resilience. By the end of the first week, gang leaders often begin forming a mental routine. Exercise in the cell, limited reading, and reflection on past actions help occupy time. Some write letters to lawyers or family, though correspondence is heavily monitored. Meals are functional, not pleasurable. Privacy is minimal. The environment is engineered to erode old behaviors while testing psychological strength. Despite the harsh conditions, some inmates attempt to adapt. Those with the most violent backgrounds sometimes find solace in strict adherence to the rules, viewing the regimented schedule as a way to regain a sense of control. Others quietly resist through small acts, arranging possessions a certain way, memorizing routines, or finding mental exercises to pass hours in isolation. Adaptation is survival. ADX Florence intake and initial processing showcase the intersection of control, punishment, and psychological endurance. Gang leaders, once untouchable outside, are rendered powerless within these walls. Tattoos, a former badge of honor, now serve as reminders of a life that no longer exists. Every step, from transportation to permanent cell assignment, is meticulously designed to strip autonomy while observing reactions. The first chapter of life at ADX Florence is not just imprisonment. It is a psychological crucible testing mental resilience, emotional stability, and the ability to survive under constant observation and extreme isolation. Daily life and routine. Life inside ADX Florence is defined by structure, restriction, and monotony. For the 18 Notorious gang leaders serving life sentences, daily existence is a relentless sequence of confinement, observation, and minimal interaction. Unlike state prisons, where gangs may exert influence and movement is relatively fluid, ADX Florence is designed to minimize contact, suppress power, and reduce opportunities for manipulation. Every day is meticulously scheduled, leaving little room for choice, and ensuring that survival becomes an exercise in endurance rather than dominance. A typical day begins with a wake-up announcement over the intercom, often before sunrise. Guards move through corridors in strict rotation, checking each cell to ensure compliance. Lights come on at exactly the scheduled time, a reminder that autonomy is gone. Gang leaders, once accustomed to dictating terms in their neighborhoods or even in prison systems, now follow strict schedules with little flexibility. Even the smallest deviation is noted, recorded, and can affect privileges or cell assignment. Morning routines are functional rather than comforting. Inmates make their beds, clean their cells, and prepare for the day. Meals are delivered in small trays through slots in the steel door. Breakfast is minimal: oatmeal, toast, or cereal with coffee or water. Gang leaders often sit silently, tattoos visible on forearms and necks, the symbols of their past life stark against the gray walls. Meals are eaten in isolation, with no conversation, forcing reflection on the life choices that led to their current state. Exercise is permitted for 1 hour a day, typically in small, enclosed spaces called recreation cages. Each cage is 12 by 12 feet, surrounded by concrete walls and bars, with minimal equipment. Gang leaders run in place, do push-ups or shadow box, tattoos glistening under dim lighting. This hour is both a physical release and a psychological outlet. The routine prevents complete mental stagnation, but it is not a luxury. It is a controlled release designed to maintain basic health and limit agitation. Some inmates use this time to rehearse mental exercises, recite past crimes, or contemplate legal appeals. Throughout the day, interaction with staff is minimal but precise. Guards deliver meals, conduct checks, and escort inmates to limited areas for medical or legal needs. Gang leaders learn to observe the patterns of staff behavior, noting which officers are strict, which are indifferent, and how routines can be leveraged for minor advantages. Despite these calculations, power remains firmly in the hands of the prison. Any attempt to assert dominance, verbally or physically, is met with immediate correction. Solitary confinement within solitary confinement is a rare but real measure. Work and recreation opportunities are scarce. Some inmates are allowed limited educational or artistic activities, such as reading, legal research, or journaling. Gang leaders often use these outlets to maintain cognitive function. Reading includes legal texts, newspapers, or books on philosophy and history. Writing letters, though heavily monitored, provides a tenuous connection to the outside world. Every action, from reading to writing, is a strategy to occupy time and preserve a sense of self in an environment engineered to erode it. The psychological impact of isolation is profound. Studies on solitary confinement show increased anxiety, paranoia, depression, and in some cases, hallucinations. Gang leaders are not immune. Many report vivid recollections of their criminal pasts, conflicts with rivals, and regrets over decisions. Tattoos become mental touchstones, reminders of a life that commanded respect, wealth, and fear. Some inmates trace their ink with fingers while sitting silently, a private ritual connecting them to their former identities. Others study the details of tattoos as a form of meditation, keeping the mind engaged and preventing deterioration under extreme monotony. Meals, though functional, are another form of control. Lunch and dinner are delivered in the same rigid manner as breakfast. Gang leaders often eat quickly, mindful of surveillance cameras, and sometimes organize their trays meticulously as a minor assertion of control. The monotony of meals reinforces the psychological architecture of ADX Florence: predictability, observation, and lack of social stimulation. Inmates who attempt to make food more enjoyable, such as seasoning or arranging trays differently, are carefully monitored for adherence to rules. Visitors are rare, and even contact with lawyers is strictly regulated. Gang leaders face the reality that most of their outside world connections are severed. Letters are read, monitored, and censored. Phone calls are limited to approved lines. This isolation ensures that influence and reputation outside the prison hold little meaning. The control ADX exercises over communication prevents the gang leaders from organizing, intimidating, or exploiting anyone beyond the walls, effectively neutralizing the empire they once commanded. Inmates develop personal coping mechanisms. Some memorize patterns of guards, developing strategies to navigate their limited environment efficiently. Others focus on mental exercises, meditation, or physical conditioning during recreation. Tattoos, again, serve as a symbolic link to identity and resilience. Gang leaders often reflect on each image, recalling the story behind it, the threat it once represented, and the power it once communicated. This reflection is both comforting and a reminder of what has been lost. Lights out marks the final daily ritual. Inmates return to their concrete cells, the door sliding closed with a definitive clang. Darkness and silence dominate for 12 hours, broken only by guard checks or alarms. Gang leaders face the most acute psychological stress during this period. The quiet magnifies memories, anxieties, and regrets. Tattoos, the last vestiges of their former life, often become objects of focus in the darkness, visual anchors in an otherwise featureless environment. Routine at ADX Florence may seem repetitive, but it is far from trivial. Every movement is monitored, every action observed, and every deviation recorded. Gang leaders, once masters of fear and influence, are reduced to mere participants in a system designed for control. They learn that survival depends on discipline, mental fortitude, and adherence to structure. Adaptation is not optional, it is a necessity. Those who fail to adapt face heightened scrutiny, restricted privileges, or additional isolation. Daily life at ADX Florence is a study in psychological endurance, control, and resilience. Gang leaders, whose names once inspired fear on the streets, now navigate a world where their past identity offers no advantage. Tattoos, once a declaration of power, become private symbols of perseverance. Every meal, every hour of recreation, and every interaction with staff is governed by strict rules, leaving no room for spontaneity or manipulation. Within this controlled routine, inmates learn that survival is no longer about fear or reputation. It is about enduring mentally and physically in one of the most secure and isolating prisons in the world. Psychological effects and mental health struggles, 1,000 words. ADX Florence is often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, but beyond its reinforced walls and razor wire, the most intense punishment is psychological. For the 18 Notorious gang leaders serving life sentences, isolation, monotony, and extreme control create a daily mental battle. Gangsters who once commanded fear and influence now confront the limits of a human mind under constant observation and deprivation. The tattoos adorning their bodies, symbols of power, loyalty, and violence, serve as silent witnesses to their internal struggles. Isolation is the defining factor of psychological strain. Inmates spend 23 hours a day alone, with 1 hour for exercise in a small concrete cage. Human interaction is minimal. Guards communicate only as necessary, and other inmates are almost never encountered. This extreme solitude amplifies stress, anxiety, and depression. Gang leaders who thrived on intimidation and influence outside the walls now experience profound powerlessness. The mental weight of solitude is relentless, eroding both confidence and emotional stability. Many inmates report hyperawareness and paranoia. Surrounded by surveillance cameras and strict rules, they learn to anticipate every guard's move, every schedule change, and every restriction. While trained instincts from criminal life help in recognizing patterns, they also fuel anxiety. Gang leaders frequently imagine threats from other inmates, from authority figures, and even from imagined outside enemies. Tattoos, once markers of dominance, become internal reminders of past identity and past conflicts, exacerbating the tension between who they were and who they must be now. Sleep disturbances are another significant challenge. Cells are dimly lit, soundproofed, and often silent beyond the occasional echo of distant voices or metal doors. The mind, deprived of social stimulation and natural cues, struggles to maintain a normal circadian rhythm. Inmates may suffer from insomnia, vivid nightmares, or night terrors. Gang leaders sometimes find themselves reliving violent encounters from their pasts, haunted by decisions that once strengthened their reputations but now serve as sources of guilt or fear. Tattoos of past affiliations become focal points during these moments, tangible reminders of a life that contributed to their current confinement. Depression and emotional numbness are common. Inmates often describe a sense of emptiness, as though life outside no longer exists. For gang leaders, whose lives were once filled with strategic thinking, risk, and engagement with others, this void is especially harsh. Tattoos, which once communicated identity and authority, now serve as static symbols in a static environment. In this vacuum, even small tasks, making the bed, reading, or exercising, become critical anchors to preserve some sense of normalcy. Some gang leaders develop coping mechanisms to endure the psychological pressure. Mental exercises, memorization, and meditation are common strategies. Inmates may study legal documents or historical texts, dissecting strategies and events to occupy their minds. Tattoos are sometimes used as tools for focus, recalling the story behind each inked symbol, the significance of affiliations, and even the consequences of past violence. In a cell stripped of color and movement, tattoos act as mental touchstones, helping inmates maintain a fragile sense of identity. However, coping strategies are not always enough. Severe cases of anxiety, panic attacks, or hallucinations occur. Psychologists working with ADX Florence inmates note that solitary confinement can amplify pre-existing mental health conditions. Gang leaders, accustomed to chaotic but structured criminal lives, sometimes struggle to process the stillness of complete isolation. Without social interaction or outlets for aggression, the mind can create threats, memories, or illusions, intensifying the feeling of being under siege despite being physically secure. Aggression is another concern. In a typical prison, gang leaders might assert control over others to maintain status. At ADX Florence, opportunities to exercise influence are minimal. Some inmates direct aggression inward, manifesting as self-harm or obsessive behaviors. Tattoos again play a dual role, reminders of past aggression and outlets for controlled expression. Gang leaders may trace designs with their fingers, mentally recalling their past actions as a controlled form of aggression, a way to manage frustration without breaking rules. The extreme structure of daily life is a psychological tool in itself. Every action is monitored. When meals are eaten, how exercise is performed, and how cells are maintained. Inmates quickly learn that rule following is survival. While this minimizes physical violence, it magnifies mental strain. Gang leaders must constantly regulate not only their actions, but their thoughts, balancing compliance with mental endurance. Any slip in discipline can result in isolation or removal of privileges, reinforcing the tension between autonomy and submission. Family contact, when permitted, is heavily monitored and limited. Letters and phone calls provide rare connections to the outside world, but they also emphasize distance and loss. Gang leaders often reflect on past crimes, missed relationships, and the inability to protect or guide their former networks. Tattoos serve as a silent archive of these regrets, each symbol a story of loyalty, betrayal, or violence. Mental health professionals note that attachment to these symbols can be a double-edged sword, a source of identity, but also a reminder of everything lost. Medication and mental health support are available, but carefully controlled. Gang leaders often resist full reliance on psychiatric interventions, preferring to endure the mental strain or find internal coping mechanisms. Some develop routines that integrate exercise, meditation, and reading into a mental framework that allows them to endure years, even decades, of isolation. Tattoos, once public markers of dominance, become private anchors of memory and resilience, silently sustaining them through endless monotony. ADX Florence also fosters a sense of existential reflection. For the gang leaders, isolation forces consideration of life choices, consequences, and mortality. The once immediate, violent power struggles of their past are replaced with the internal struggle to preserve mental stability. Tattoos, deeply etched into skin, remind them that identity persists even when influence does not. For some, this reflection leads to acceptance. For others, it fuels ongoing internal conflict. Ultimately, the psychological effects of life at ADX Florence are profound and enduring. Gang leaders face a battle not with other inmates, but with their own minds. Tattoos, prison routines, and mental exercises become critical tools for coping with isolation, monotony, and the constant observation that defines the prison. Survival depends not on intimidation or control, but on mental endurance, discipline, and the ability to navigate a world designed to strip identity and test the limits of human resilience. Interactions, influence, and control. At ADX Florence, the balance of power is unlike any other prison. For the 18 notorious gang leaders serving life sentences, influence over others is stripped away, leaving them with only themselves. Yet, even in isolation, human nature pushes them to test boundaries, assert control, and maintain remnants of authority. Carefully, subtly, and often in ways invisible to the untrained eye. Every interaction with staff, every observation of routines, and every response to restrictions becomes a measure of influence and survival. Most gang leaders arrive at ADX Florence accustomed to exerting power through fear, respect, and reputation. On the streets or in state prisons, a glance, a conversation, or a reputation could command obedience. In Florence, these traditional tools are meaningless. Guards are trained, vigilant, and unyielding. Inmates are physically separated from one another, preventing direct alliances or conflicts. Still, even under these extreme conditions, gang leaders search for opportunities to assert control in small, calculated ways. Tattoos, visible symbols of past dominance, often become a subtle form of communication, projecting strength or signaling past reputation to staff or potential allies. Daily interactions with guards and staff are highly controlled, but still present opportunities for negotiation and observation. Gang leaders quickly learn the patterns of personnel, which guards are strict, which are more lenient, and which routines are flexible. Some inmates subtly test boundaries, requesting small items, adjusting routines, or questioning procedures, without overtly breaking rules. Success requires timing, restraint, and an understanding of human behavior. Tattoos, often intimidating in appearance, can enhance these subtle displays, signaling toughness and demanding unspoken respect. Communication between inmates is virtually non-existent, but some gang leaders find ways to leave an impression indirectly. Through gestures, written notes, or even arranging possessions in a visible pattern, they convey messages to staff or the occasional observer. These acts of control are minor compared to the influence they wielded outside, yet they provide a psychological boost. They reaffirm identity and preserve the instinct to assert power, even within a rigid system designed to suppress it. The staff's role in controlling influence cannot be overstated. Correctional officers and psychologists monitor every movement, every word, and every interaction. Any attempt at intimidation or manipulation is detected quickly. Inmates who previously ruled through fear learn that compliance, patience, and observation are now more effective tools. Gang leaders adapt, using intelligence, patience, and subtle strategy to navigate interactions safely. Tattoos continue to serve as both psychological armor and personal statement, reminding guards and inmates alike of the history etched into their skin. Visits from lawyers or limited correspondence provide additional, though tightly regulated, opportunities for influence. Inmates sometimes attempt to manipulate information through letters, appealing to sympathies or leveraging legal knowledge. Gang leaders skilled in communication may use this limited contact to maintain connections with the outside world, provide guidance to former associates, or assert their perspective on events. These efforts, however, are monitored and censored, reminding inmates that influence has limits within Florence. Even minor deviations from routine are carefully observed. Inmates who arrive early to exercise cages, meticulously arrange personal items, or take extra time with tasks are noted by staff. Gang leaders understand that these small acts can project confidence or authority without violating rules. Over time, these subtle behaviors create a personal system of control, helping them preserve a sense of identity and stability despite isolation. Tattoos, once signals to peers, now function as internal motivators, reminding inmates of past successes and personal resilience. power dynamics extend to mental games with staff. Gang leaders often use observation, silence, or feigned compliance to gauge reactions. They learn to interpret body language, predict routines, and adjust behavior accordingly. This is a form of intellectual control, replacing physical intimidation with psychological strategy. Tattoos become visual reinforcements of these internal exercises, anchoring confidence and recalling a life in which strategic thinking governs survival and dominance. Conflict management is particularly complex. In a typical prison, gang leaders resolve disputes through direct confrontation or alliances. In Florence, such options do not exist. Aggression is internalized or redirected into structured outlets, such as exercise, meditation, or mental problem solving. Tattoos provide an outlet for this energy, recalling past fights, marking victories, or commemorating fallen allies allows gang leaders to process frustration and isolation. These symbolic exercises help maintain mental stability while preventing rule violations. Staff training also emphasizes preventing manipulation. Officers are aware of inmates' backgrounds, gang affiliations, and past tactics. This awareness forces gang leaders to innovate subtly, using minimal actions to achieve psychological satisfaction. A nod, a gesture, or strategic compliance can convey authority without breaking rules. Tattoos, stark against gray uniforms or concrete walls, silently reinforce this presence and history of influence. Over time, a complex system of internal control and mental resilience emerges. Gang leaders find ways to maintain a sense of power and identity without interacting directly with others. Routines, observation, and the mental projection of dominance into their environment allow inmates to endure the isolation. Tattoos become both personal anchors and silent statements to anyone who might observe them, preserving identity and history in an environment that seeks to erase individuality. ADX Florence demonstrates that influence is not entirely extinguished by isolation. Even in one of the most secure prisons in the world, human instincts for control, strategy, and identity persist. Gang leaders adapt by shifting from external to internal power, learning that survival depends on mental acuity, subtlety, and endurance. Tattoos, once a public declaration of dominance, now act as private tools of psychological strategy, helping inmates assert control over themselves, maintain resilience, and navigate a world where influence is heavily restricted. Interactions at ADX Florence are therefore less about domination over others and more about self-mastery, strategic observation, and calculated presence. Gang leaders discover that true control in this environment comes not from fear, reputation, or physical power, but from mental endurance, discipline, and the ability to navigate every interaction, no matter how small, with precision. Tattoos remain constant symbols of identity, memory, and persistence, reminders that even when influence over others is gone, inner strength endures. Long-term survival, coping, and reflection. Surviving ADX Florence is less about confrontation and more about endurance. For the 18 notorious gang leaders serving life sentences, long-term survival requires discipline, mental fortitude, and adaptability. Years in near-total isolation test both the mind and body, forcing inmates to find ways to endure monotony, control impulses, and preserve a sense of identity. Tattoos, vivid reminders of past power, loyalty, and violence, serve as anchors, helping inmates navigate the endless routine of their lives. Daily life remains regimented. Wake up, meals, 1 hour of recreation, and return to the cell. Over time, gang leaders develop personal systems of routine, often using minute variations to maintain a sense of autonomy. Some memorize schedules, mentally chart the movements of staff, or create mental exercises to occupy hours. These routines are essential for survival, providing structure in an environment designed to remove all control. Tattoos become part of this mental structure, symbols that mark identity and personal history amidst concrete walls. Mental resilience is crucial. Gang leaders face recurring psychological stressors, isolation, monotony, reflection on past crimes, and the impossibility of influence outside the prison. Many develop meditation techniques, cognitive exercises, or journaling practices to manage these pressures. Some focus on personal reflection, using tattoos as tools for mental storytelling, each ink design reminding them of lessons learned, victories earned, or mistakes made. This process allows inmates to maintain a sense of self even as the environment attempts to reduce them to a number. Physical health is equally important. Recreation, though limited, becomes a vital outlet for energy, aggression, and mental clarity. Gang leaders lift their body weight, shadowbox, or run in place, maintaining strength and focus. Tattoos glistening under dim cell lighting are not only visual reminders of identity, but also markers of resilience. The body as well as the mind must endure. For many, physical discipline mirrors mental discipline. The ability to persevere is reinforced in both arenas. Coping mechanisms often include creative outlets. Some inmates study legal documents meticulously, seeking avenues for appeals or understanding the system that confines them. Others immerse themselves in reading, memorization, or writing. Art and expression are rare but powerful tools. Sketching, note-taking, or mental storytelling help reduce stress and occupy the mind. Tattoos, always present, act as guides for these exercises. Narratives etched in skin inspire internal reflection, provide continuity, and reinforce self-concept in an environment engineered to strip identity. Over years, gang leaders come to understand the importance of internal control. Conflict with staff is minimal, and communication with others is strictly monitored. Influence is measured through personal behavior, strategic thinking, and self-management. Inmates learn that survival depends less on fear or aggression and more on patience, observation, and careful mental planning. Tattoos, as silent symbols of a previous life, provide confidence and serve as reminders of strength that persists despite confinement. For many, reflection on the past becomes unavoidable. Gang leaders examine choices, actions, and consequences. The isolation of ADX Florence removes distractions, forcing contemplation. Tattoos become focal points for these reflections. The face of a fallen rival, a gang emblem, or a date marking a pivotal event are constantly present. They serve as prompts for memory, reflection, and understanding, teaching lessons from a life lived in violence and ambition, now confined to concrete and steel. Relationships, though extremely limited, are another challenge. Communication with family, lawyers, or occasional visitors is rare and highly regulated. Gang leaders must navigate these interactions with care, balancing emotional needs with strict rules. Correspondence is monitored, limiting the ability to influence others, yet it remains one of the few links to a world beyond the walls. Tattoos again act as silent symbols of loyalty, resilience, and continuity, reminding inmates of personal identity and commitments despite the barriers of incarceration. Some gang leaders develop long-term strategies for mental survival. Visualization, mental mapping, and rehearsed routines become tools to endure years or decades. Tattoos function as markers in these mental exercises, reminders of hierarchy, allegiance, and personal history. Even in total isolation, these visual cues help inmates maintain a sense of continuity and control, reinforcing a mindset that supports endurance. ADX Florence also imposes existential reflection. Inmates consider morality, mortality, and legacy. Gang leaders who once thrived on fear and influence outside the prison walls now face the reality that legacy is internal. Tattoos, physical records of past life, provide tangible evidence of personal history, reinforcing lessons learned and accomplishments achieved. These reflections, though often somber, are critical for psychological stability, allowing inmates to reconcile past identities with present reality. Long-term survival demands acceptance of harsh realities. Gang leaders understand that external control is absolute. Staff dictate every movement, interactions are limited, and freedom is gone. What remains is internal control, the ability to regulate emotions, maintain focus, and endure the psychological toll of extreme isolation. Tattoos, now more than ever, symbolize endurance. They are daily reminders that identity persists, strength remains, and survival is possible even in one of the world's most secure prisons. In conclusion, life at ADX Florence is a study in human endurance. Gang leaders serving life sentences face extreme isolation, regimented routines, and constant observation. Their tattoos, once symbols of fear and influence, now serve as tools for reflection, resilience, and mental survival. Every day, they navigate monotony, mental strain, and limited outlets, relying on discipline, routine, and self-control. Survival is not measured by dominance over others, but by the ability to endure, adapt, and preserve identity under the most restrictive conditions imaginable. ADX Florence is not just a prison. It is a crucible, testing the limits of human psychology and shaping the way even the most notorious criminals live, think, and survive.